Hello. I'm going to talk to you for a few minutes now about the literary practice of irony. I've had a hard time defining this term because it has a number of different meanings, and we use it in a number of different ways. However, literarily, we can generally think of irony as a meaningful difference between expectation and reality. And I want to emphasize that I'm talking about a meaningful difference. Although a black fly in your Chardonnay, for instance, may differ from your expectation of bug-free wine, this difference doesn't seem to have an ironic meaning. As I understand it, writers use the difference to let readers see reality in a different way. In other words, writers use irony to redefine how a reader should think about the world. By showing the incompleteness or the invalidity of those expectations, writers can use irony to make thematic statements about their subjects. I think I can most easily explain irony by showing examples of a couple of different kinds. There are numerous kinds of irony, but in this lecture I'll just focus on two of them to give you a flavor of what I mean when I use the term. To begin with, we can look at verbal irony, which we can define as statements that differ meaningfully from reality. We expect people to say things that match the reality we observe. We expect them to make statements about what we actually see or what we actually experience. When they don't do that, when they ignore or violate that expectation, we get verbal irony. As an example, consider the dog in this picture. Notice the difference between what the dog says and the actual state of the world around the dog. Look at that fiery reality and compare it to the dog's verbal statement that this is fine. We can see that difference as irony, and since some of the difference comes in the form of words, we can call that verbal irony. It shows how easily we can misrepresent a situation to ourselves for our own comfort. Seeing the difference between what the dog says and what the world is, this example of verbal irony highlights the difference between what we tell ourselves and what we know, and it does this in a particularly impactful way through this use of verbal irony. We often get this same message about misunderstanding and misrepresentation when we experience dramatic irony, a situation where a character's expectation differs from a reader's knowledge of reality. We can see an example of this in Ibsen's A Doll's House. I'm thinking specifically of the scene in Act 2 where Nora dances frenetically for her husband in rehearsal for the Christmas pageant. He thinks she's trying to impress him with her dedication to the family spirit of the holiday and wanting to have a great party. But we know that she's trying to distract him from the actual reality that Krogstad is threatening to expose. And this difference between what Helmer knows and what we know gives us an idea of the depth of deception, both Nora's deception and Helmer's own self-deception, in this marriage. In this way, the dramatic irony in Ibsen's play reinforces this theme of self-deception and deception of even our most intimate companions. Thus, as we've seen, attention to irony can help us as readers to see meanings in the literary works we study. When we notice a difference between our expectations and reality, or when we notice a difference between a character's expectations and the reality we can see in a literary work, we get a chance to question those expectations. thus seeing more deeply into not just these works of literature, but also our lives. The more we recognize irony, the more we can get from our experiences, both literary and non-literary. As always, thank you for your time and attention.